The great house of Silas Thornwood was the quietest, and therefore the loneliest place Leo had ever known. It wasn't the silence of peace, but the heavy, echoing silence of a beautiful prison. Leo, a young man with hair the color of autumn leaves and eyes that held too much sky for such a dim place, stood by the floor-to-ceiling window, watching rain streak the glass like tears. He was the Omega husband of Silas Thornwood, the Alpha CEO of a vast empire, and in the 6 months since a business arrangement had forced their marriage, Leo had learned one thing for certain. He was utterly, completely alone. He was a decoration. A pretty painting on the wall of a blind man's mansion. That was the worst part, the blindness. Silas, his husband, had lost his sight in the same accident that had taken his parents years ago, or so the story went. Leo's family had sold him into this marriage, desperate for the financial security the Thornwood name provided. They'd said, "He's gentle. He's kind. He needs a companion." They'd made it sound like a charity case. Leo had arrived with a heart full of fearful duty, only to find a man who was little more than a ghost in his own home. A soft knock at the door of the sunroom made Leo tense. It was the only knock he ever heard. "Enter," he said, his voice barely a whisper. The door opened and Kai, Silas's personal bodyguard, stepped in. He was a mountain of a man with dark hair, a solemn face and a thin, pale scar that traced a path from his eyebrow down his cheek. He carried a small tray with a teacup and a plate of lemon cookies, Leo's favorite. Kai never spoke much. He just moved with a quiet efficiency that was somehow less painful than the loud pity of the other staff. "Your tea, Mr. Leo," Kai said, his voice a low rumble. He set the tray on a side table, his movements precise. His eyes, a stormy gray, flickered to Leo's face for just a second before looking away. "Thank you, Kai," Leo murmured, not moving from the window. He heard the soft rustle of Kai's jacket as the bodyguard lingered. "The rain is heavy. It's cold in here," Kai said, an awkward attempt at conversation. He reached over and turned up the thermostat on the wall, a small act of kindness that made Leo's throat tighten. "It doesn't matter," Leo said, hugging himself. He didn't mean the temperature. Kai was silent for a long moment. "He asks after you, Mr. Silas. At dinner." Leo's lips pressed into a thin line. "Silas asked." Silas always asked through Kai or the butler. "Is Leo well? Did Leo eat? Does Leo need anything?" But Silas himself never came. The Alpha was always in his study or being led to a business meeting, a hand on Kai's arm, his unseeing eyes hidden behind dark glasses. He was a figure of distant, fragile nobility. Leo couldn't hate him, not really. How can you hate a whisper? But he could resent him. He could drown in the loneliness this polite, blind man had built around them. "Tell him I'm fine," Leo said, the lie as familiar as his own reflection. Kai gave a single, slow nod. He turned to leave but paused at the door. "The art supplies you requested arrived. I placed them in the studio." A tiny spark, the only one he ever felt, flickered in Leo's chest. His studio was the one room that felt like his. The one place where color existed. "Thank you," he said, and this time he meant it. After Kai left, Leo finally moved. He walked through the vast, opulent halls, his footsteps swallowed by thick carpets. He passed the open door of Silas's study. Inside, Silas sat behind a massive desk, his head tilted as he listened to an audio report. His face was all sharp, handsome angles, his black hair perfectly styled. He looked like a statue of a king. A blind, helpless king. Leo hurried past, a familiar mix of guilt and irritation churning in his stomach. He reached his studio and closed the door, leaning against it with a sigh of relief. Here the world was his. Canvases leaned against the walls, some splashed with joyful color, others covered in dark, swirling grays. He picked up a brush but just held it, staring at a half-finished painting of a forest. It was the forest from his childhood home, a place he hadn't seen in years. A place where he'd once felt free. A place where he'd had a friend, a boy who would defend him from bullies, a boy with serious gray eyes who had vanished one summer without a word. Leo's thoughts, as they often did, drifted to a different time, to a person who felt more real than his own husband. Rex. His first love, or what he'd thought was love. Rex had been everything an alpha was supposed to be, charming, confident, dazzling. He'd swept Leo off his feet, made him feel chosen. Until he hadn't. Leo's fingers tightened around the brush. He remembered the crushing betrayal, the day he'd found out Rex had only been with him to get close to his family's small company. When Leo's father had refused Rex's demands, Rex had dropped Leo publicly, humiliating him, calling him a naive little Omega. The heartbreak had left Leo shattered, and it was that broken version of himself his family had packaged up and sent to Silas Thornwood. Now he was trapped in a new gilded cage, married to a man who seemed less like an alpha and more like a shadow. A kind shadow, but a shadow nonetheless. Leo dipped his brush into a smear of black paint and slashed it across the happy forest scene. This was his life now. A beautiful, lonely, silent ruin. And as the rain beat against the studio window, Leo wondered if this quiet emptiness was all his future would ever hold. He didn't know that far below his quiet studio in the blind man's study, plans were already in motion, and the first threads of a web meant to protect him and test him were being woven in the dark. The rain from the day before had settled into a dreary, misty drizzle that clung to the windows of Thornwood Manor like a sad ghost. Leo had barely slept, his dreams filled with shadowy forests and the echoing sound of Rex's laugh. He moved through his morning routine like a clockwork toy, his body going through the motions while his heart felt heavy and still. He took his breakfast in the small, sunny nook off the kitchen, a privilege he'd requested just to avoid the cavernous formal dining room. As he pushed scrambled eggs around his plate, the door opened softly. It wasn't the cheerful maid Martha. It was Kai, filling the doorway with his quiet, solid presence. In his hands was a large, flat cardboard package. "For you," Kai said, his voice that same low rumble. He placed the package carefully against the empty chair beside Leo. "More canvas. The heavy kind you preferred." Leo looked up, surprised. He'd only mentioned it in passing days ago, a muttered wish for a sturdier surface for a new idea. "Oh, thank you. You didn't have to." "It's no trouble," Kai interrupted, but not rudely. It was a statement of simple fact. He hesitated, his stormy gray eyes scanning Leo's face, taking in the faint shadows under his eyes. "You didn't finish your cookies yesterday. The lemon ones." It was such an odd, specific thing to notice. A warmth that had nothing to do with the tea spread briefly in Leo's chest before being swallowed by his general gloom. "I wasn't very hungry." Kai gave a slow, single nod. "I'll tell Martha. Perhaps she can make the orange shortbread today." Before Leo could respond, Kai turned and left, his movements silent on the tile floor. Leo stared at the package. It was meticulous, wrapped in plain brown paper, the tape neat and precise. Just like Kai. Everything about the bodyguard was controlled, measured, and watchful. He was a constant, silent satellite in Leo's lonely orbit, appearing with tea, art supplies, or sometimes just a quiet presence at the end of the hall when Leo took his evening walks in the walled garden. Later that afternoon, driven by a restless energy, Leo went to the garden. The drizzle had stopped, leaving the world washed clean and sparkling. He sat on a cold stone bench beneath a bare cherry tree, sketching the twisting branches in a small notebook. This was when the silence of the house felt least oppressive, filled with the chirp of birds and the distant hum of the city. He heard the crunch of gravel on the path and knew it was Kai even before he looked up. The bodyguard was on his patrol, a routine check of the grounds. He paused when he saw Leo, his posture straightening slightly. "It's damp. You'll get cold," Kai stated, his brows drawing together in what looked like concern. "I'm fine," Leo said, but even as he did, a sudden sharp gust of wind shook droplets from the tree onto his neck, making him shiver. Kai didn't say, "I told you so." He simply unzipped his own dark jacket, stepped forward and draped it over Leo's shoulders. The gesture was so swift and certain that Leo froze, the heavy fabric settling around him, warm from Kai's body heat and smelling faintly of crisp air and cedar. It was the most direct kindness anyone had shown him in months. "Thank you," Leo whispered, pulling the jacket tighter. The warmth was more than physical. It was a shield against the loneliness. Kai stood nearby, not sitting, a sentinel against the gray sky. For several minutes, the only sound was the scratch of Leo's pencil. Then Kai spoke, his voice softer than Leo had ever heard it. "You used to draw. In the park. By the old oak tree." Leo's pencil stopped dead. His heart gave a hard, painful thump. He looked up, his eyes wide. What?" Kai's gaze was distant, fixed on the garden wall as if seeing something far away. "A long time ago. You had a blue backpack. You'd sit for hours drawing squirrels and birds. You were always by yourself." A memory, fragile and long forgotten, floated to the surface of Leo's mind. A small neighborhood park. The gnarly old oak tree with the low, perfect sitting branch. A lonely boy with a sketchbook. And another boy, older, who would sometimes sit on the bench nearby, reading or just watching the clouds. He was quiet, with intense gray eyes. Leo had always felt safe when he was there. "That was you." Leo breathed, the world tilting slightly. "The boy on the bench?" Kai's jaw tightened. He gave the barest nod. My family moved away that summer. Suddenly, there was a story in those words, a dark one that he didn't elaborate on. I didn't get to say goodbye. A wave of emotion crashed over Leo, astonishment, a strange sense of connection, and a deep, old sadness. That quiet boy had been a fragment of happiness in a childhood that was becoming lonely. And he had just vanished. Just like everyone good seemed to vanish from Leo's life. I looked for you, Leo said softly, the confession pulled from a young, hurt place inside him. The next week, and the week after. You were just gone. For the first time, Kai's stern expression cracked. Something like profound regret flickered in his eyes. I am sorry. The words seemed inadequate, heavy with more meaning than they could hold. A thick silence fell between them, charged with this newfound history. The drizzle began again, a fine, cold mist. Leo hugged Kai's jacket closer. He had 1,000 questions, but they stuck in his throat. Why was Kai here now as a bodyguard? Did Silas know? Was this a coincidence? Before he could speak, the French doors from the library opened, and Silas appeared, one hand resting lightly on the doorframe. He was dressed impeccably, his dark glasses in place. He turned his head slightly as if listening to the garden's sounds. Kai, he called, his voice smooth and calm. The car for the board meeting will be here shortly. The moment shattered. Kai's posture snapped back into that of the perfect, professional bodyguard. Coming, sir, he replied, his voice once more a neutral rumble. He glanced at Leo, a silent question in his eyes. Keep it, Leo said quickly, meaning the jacket. For the walk back. Kai nodded. With one last, unreadable look, he turned and walked toward the house, his stride purposeful. He went to Silas, who placed a hand on his offered arm, and the blind CO was led back inside. Leo sat on the cold bench, the sketchbook forgotten in his lap. The garden felt emptier than ever, but the memory of the park, of the boy on the bench, burned brightly in his mind. Kai wasn't just a kind bodyguard. He was a piece of his past, a ghost who had walked back into his life. And as Leo watched the mist curl around the empty path, he felt the first faint stirring of something he thought this house had killed, curiosity. And with it, a fragile, dangerous thread of hope began to weave itself around his lonely heart. Someone from a time before the betrayals and the gilded cage remembered him. The real him. And that knowledge was a tiny, defiant flame in the gathering gloom. The fragile thread of hope that had begun to weave itself in the garden lasted for 3 days. For 3 days, Leo found himself looking for Kai, not just as a bodyguard but as the boy from the park. Their interactions remained brief, a delivered package of paints, a silent nod in the hall, but they were charged now with a secret history. It was a small, glowing coal in the cold fireplace of Leo's heart. Then on the 4th day the coal was doused. Martha, her face pinched with disapproval, found Leo mixing colors in his studio. Mr. Leo, you have a visitor at the main entrance. A Mr. Rex Vane. He says he's an old friend. The name hit Leo like a physical blow. His hand jerked, smearing brilliant cobalt blue across the wooden palette. His breath caught and the world seemed to tilt. Rex, here. At the one place that was supposed to be a sanctuary from his past. I don't want to see him, Leo managed to say, his voice thin. He is quite insistent, Martha replied, her tone making it clear she thought this friend was trouble. He said it's urgent. Concerning your family. A cold trickle of fear joined the shock. His family. Of course. Rex knew exactly which strings to pull. With trembling hands, Leo wiped the paint from his fingers on a rag. He couldn't refuse. Not if it involved his parents, who were still struggling financially despite the Thornwood alliance. Fine, he whispered. I'll meet him in the front parlor. The parlor was a formal, chilly room meant for business acquaintances. Leo stood by the cold marble fireplace, feeling like an intruder in his own home. When the door opened and Rex walked in, it was as if a storm had entered. He was just as Leo remembered, impossibly handsome with golden hair, a dazzling smile, and the confident swagger of an alpha who always got what he wanted. His eyes, a bright, piercing blue, swept over Leo with an appraisal that made Leo's skin crawl. Leo, Rex breathed, his voice a warm, familiar honey. He crossed the room swiftly as if to embrace him, but Leo took a sharp step back, hitting the mantel. Rex's smile didn't falter, it just turned a little sharper. Look at you. Thornwood's treasure. This place is impressive. He said, impressive, the way someone might say, gaudy. What do you want, Rex? Leo asked, forcing steel into his voice. What about my family? Rex waved a dismissive hand, his gaze roaming the expensive paintings on the wall. "Oh, they're fine. For now." It was the only way I could get past that stone-faced butler. He finally looked directly at Leo, his expression shifting to one of soft, false concern. "I came for you, Leo. I heard about this arrangement. Married to a blind man? A kind, gentle soul, they say." He said the words like they were a disease. "My heart broke for you. You who deserved so much more. You who deserve passion and protection and a real alpha." Each word was a carefully placed poison dart. They found the hidden bruises of Leo's loneliness and pressed down hard. Leo's fists clenched at his sides. "Silas is my husband. My life is here." "Is it?" Rex took a step closer, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. The scent of his expensive cologne, once so intoxicating to Leo, now smelled cloying and false. "I see you, Leo. Trapped in this museum. Your husband is a ghost, a weak, blind ghost who hides in his study. He can't see you. He can't appreciate you. He can't protect you. What happens if there's trouble? He'll need someone to lead him by the hand." The cruel accuracy of the words stole Leo's breath. They were the same fears that haunted his own sleepless nights, given voice by the person who had taught him what betrayal felt like. "He's not weak," Leo protested, but it sounded hollow even to him. He thought of Silas, so often guided by Kai's arm, his world defined by sound and touch. Rex saw the doubt. A triumphant gleam lit his eyes. "Come back to me, Leo," he murmured, his voice slick and persuasive. "Let me fix my mistake. I was young, I was greedy. I've changed. I have my own company now, power of my own. I can give you everything. The excitement, the life you're missing. We can be the partnership we were always meant to be." For a dizzying second the old charm worked. The memory of first love, of feeling chosen and adored, washed over Leo. It was a powerful lure compared to the silent, empty halls of Thornwood Manor. The painting of his life was so gray, and Rex was offering a splash of his old, gilded color. But then Leo looked past the dazzling smile into Rex's eyes. He saw the same calculation that had been there the day Rex had publicly discarded him. He saw the greed, not for Leo but for what Leo now represented, a connection to the mighty Thornwood Empire. The warmth of the memory turned to ash in his mouth. "No," Leo said, the word firmer this time. "You haven't changed. You just want a new trophy. Get out, Rex." Rex's pleasant mask slipped, revealing a flash of cold fury. It was gone in an instant, replaced by a look of wounded sadness. "You're making a mistake. Pining for a man who can't even see your face. When you realize the depth of your loneliness here, you'll know where to find me." He turned and strode from the room, leaving the door open behind him. Leo stood frozen, trembling, the poisonous whispers still echoing in the air. The confrontation had lasted only minutes, but it had torn open every half-healed wound. He didn't know that the encounter had not gone unseen. From the shadowed second-floor balcony that overlooked the grand foyer, two men had observed Rex's confident entrance. Silas stood perfectly still, his head tilted, listening to the tone of the voices below, not just the words. And beside him, Kai's hand was clenched so tightly on the marble railing that his knuckles were white. He had seen the fear on Leo's face, had watched the snake from Leo's past slither back into his life. A low, almost inaudible growl vibrated in Kai's chest, a sound of pure, protective fury. The game had just become infinitely more dangerous. A week of oppressive quiet followed Rex's visit. The house seemed to hold its breath. Leo moved through it like a phantom, the ghost of Rex's words clinging to him. Weak, blind, a ghost. He tried to lose himself in painting, attacking a large canvas with slashes of angry red and somber purple, but his heart wasn't in it. He was just covering up the happy forest for good. Silas, as always, was a distant presence. Leo caught glimpses of him being led to his car by Kai, or sitting in the music room simply listening to symphonies that filled the halls with sound but no warmth. The guilt and resentment in Leo's chest were a tangled knot. He couldn't hate this gentle, blind man, but he was drowning in the life Silas's name had bound him to. The text message came on a Thursday afternoon, buzzing on Leo's phone like an electric shock. "Unknown number. Leo, it's Rex. I'm sorry. I was out of line. I'm leaving the city soon. Can we meet just once as old friends? There's something I found, something from your grandfather's house before it was sold. I think you should have it. The old cafe on Elm Street. For PM? No drama. I promise." Leo stared at the words. Something from his grandfather? The kind old man who had encouraged his art, whose house had been sold to pay his family's debts. The pull was immediate and powerful. It wasn't just an object, it was a piece of his true self, a fragment of a happier past. And Rex's tone was so different, apologetic, final. Maybe he meant it. Maybe this was a chance for a clean, quiet goodbye to that painful chapter. It was a terrible idea. Every cell in Leo's body knew it. But the loneliness was a louder voice. The thought of holding something tangible from his grandfather, of maybe having one civil conversation that could bury the old hurt, was too tempting. He typed a reply before he could think better of it. Leo, okay. Just for a minute. He told Martha he was going to the art supply store. His heart hammered against his ribs as he called for a town car from the household account. He felt like a spy in his own life. The cafe on Elm Street was cozy and half empty. Rex sat in a corner booth, a small wrapped parcel on the table. He looked up and gave Leo a small regretful smile that didn't reach his eyes. You came. Thank you. Leo slid into the booth, keeping his coat on. You said you had something of my grandfather's. I do. Rex nudged the parcel forward. But first, coffee? For old time's sake. This was the mistake. The minute Leo nodded, the trap was sprung. Rex signaled the waiter, ordering for them both just like he used to. He began talking, his voice a low, intimate murmur, leaning across the table. He spoke of shared memories, carefully edited to remove the pain, painting a picture of a golden past. He was charming, disarming, and he carefully kept the conversation away from Silas, from the present. The parcel sat between them, unopened, a silent promise. Leo felt himself getting pulled into the current of nostalgia. It was easy, so easy to remember the good parts and forget the devastating end. He let his guard down a fraction of an inch. That's when Rex moved. As the waiter brought their coffees, Rex reached out and covered Leo's hand on the table with his own. His grip was firm, warm, and completely inappropriate. I really have missed you, Leo, Rex said, his voice loud enough for nearby tables to hear. His thumb stroked Leo's knuckles. Leo yanked his hand back as if burned. Don't, he hissed, panic flaring. But it was too late. From the perspective of anyone watching, like the private investigator Rex had hired to sit 2 tables over with a hidden camera, it looked like a tender moment between former lovers. A secret meeting. A held hand. I should go, Leo said, his voice shaking. He grabbed the parcel and stood up. So soon. Rex's smile was back, but now it was cold and satisfied. The mask was gone. Give my best to your blind husband. Leo fled, the little parcel feeling like a lead weight in his hands. The ride home was a blur of shame and fear. He'd been a fool. He'd walked right into it. He burst into the manor, intending to hide the shameful trip in his studio forever. The foyer was not empty. Silas stood at the base of the grand staircase, one hand resting on the banister. He was dressed not in his usual soft sweaters, but in a severe, dark suit. His posture was different, not the tentative stance of a blind man, but the rooted, powerful stance of a general. Kai stood rigidly beside him, his face a stone mask of fury, his eyes locked on Leo. The air was frozen, thick with a tension Leo had never felt in this house before. Leo, Silas said. His voice was different. It wasn't the gentle, inquiring tone. It was flat, cold, and cut through the air like a shard of ice. Did you have a pleasant, shopping trip? Leo's blood ran cold. He clutched the parcel to his chest. The cafe on Elm Street has poor selections for canvases, I'm told, Silas continued, taking one slow, precise step forward. Kai matched his step, a shadow of controlled menace. He knew. He knew everything. Terror, sharp and clean, sliced through Leo's shame. He was caught. Rex had set him up and Silas had seen it. He waited for the explosion, the accusations of being unfaithful, the order to pack his bags. But Silas didn't shout. He tilted his head, and for the first time, Leo had the chilling sensation that Silas was seeing him, truly seeing him, from behind those dark glasses. Rex Vane, Silas stated, the name a poison on his tongue. A vulture who preys on perceived weakness. He believes he can steal from my home because he thinks I cannot see the threat. Leo could only stare, paralyzed. Silas's words weren't directed at him. They were about him, as if he were a piece of threatened property. Then Silas turned his head slightly toward the main doors. He is also, it seems, incapable of understanding a direct dismissal. As if on cue, the front doors swung open. There, framed in the evening light, was Rex himself. He wore a smug, triumphant smile, which instantly faltered when he saw the scene in the foyer. Leo looking terrified and Silas standing with a commanding presence he had never displayed before. Silas, Rex said, recovering with a slick smile. A pleasure. I was just in the neighborhood and thought I'd check on Leo after our coffee. He seemed upset. Silas didn't respond to him. He spoke to Kai, his voice dropping into a register of absolute, terrifying authority Leo had never heard. Kai, escort this trespasser from my property. See that he understands the new boundaries. Permanently. It wasn't a request. It was an alpha command, uttered with a ferocity that vibrated in the marble hall. Kai moved. He was across the foyer in a few swift, silent strides. He didn't shout or make a scene. He simply got between Rex and the interior of the house, his massive frame blocking the way. His expression was deadly calm. You heard him, Kai growled, the sound so low and feral it made the hair on Leo's arms stand up. You are trespassing. Leave. No. And if you ever approach this house or Leo again, the consequences will be far less polite. Rex's confidence shattered. He looked from Kai's scarred, furious face to Silas's unervingly still form, and finally to Leo's shocked expression. The vulture had flown into a cage with two wolves he never knew were there. Without another word, he backed out of the doorway and disappeared into the dusk. The door closed with a heavy, final thud. The silence that followed was deafening. Leo stood, shivering, the unopened parcel from a man who had just tried to ruin him falling from his numb fingers to the floor. He looked at his husband, who slowly reached up and removed his dark glasses. And Leo's world fractured completely. Silas Thornwood turned his gaze, a sharp, intelligent and perfectly seeing gaze, directly onto Leo. His eyes were a stormy blue, clear and focused, holding none of the cloudiness of blindness. They were the eyes of a predator who had been patiently watching his territory all along. Now Leo, Silas said, his voice still cold, but now layered with a terrifying new truth. Let's discuss what happens when you invite foxes into the lion's den. The parcel from Rex hit the marble floor with a soft, pathetic thud. The sound was swallowed by the ringing silence that filled the grand foyer. Leo could only stare, his mind a white, screaming blank. The man standing before him was a stranger. The gentle slope of Silas's shoulders was gone, replaced by a rigid, powerful line. The soft, unfocused gaze was a lie. The eyes that held Leo's now were a shocking, clear blue, the color of a winter sky just before a storm, and they saw everything. You can see, Leo whispered. The words were barely a breath, but in the silence they were as loud as a shout. Yes, Silas said. The single word was simple, final, and carried the weight of 1,000 deceptions. He didn't move to pick up his fallen glasses. He just stood there, allowing Leo to drown in the truth of it. The betrayal hit then, a tsunami washing away the shock, leaving behind a scorching, painful rage. It burned through the cold fear, hotter than anything Leo had ever felt. All the loneliness, the quiet despair, the pity he'd fought against, the guilt he'd carried for resenting a blind man, it had all been a joke. A performance. And he had been the only one on stage who didn't know the script. For how long? Leo's voice shook, but it was no longer a whisper. It was a blade being sharpened. Since before our marriage contract was signed, Silas replied, his tone maddeningly calm as if discussing the weather. Leo took a step back, his legs hitting the bottom step of the staircase. The world tilted. Before. The entire foundation of their miserable life together was sand. It was all a lie. Every single day. You let me think, you let everyone think. I let my enemies think, Silas corrected, his voice cutting through Leo's spiraling thoughts. He took a step forward, and for the first time, Leo saw the true nature of his movement. Not the cautious shuffle of the blind, but the controlled, predatory stride of an alpha in his own domain. The accident that took my parents was not an accident. It was a first move in a war I was too young to fight. Pretending to be broken, to be vulnerable, was my armor. It made the greedy and the cruel reveal themselves. They saw a wounded lion and thought they could pick at the carcass. He gestured vaguely toward the door where Rex had just been thrown out. Like him. A minor pest, drawn to the scent of perceived weakness. Leo's rage found its target. And what was I? The shout echoed off the high ceiling. Kai, who had been a silent, watchful statue by the door, flinched but did not move. Was I part of the armor? A decoration to make the act more convincing? A sad little omega to complete the picture of poor, helpless Silas Thornwood? You were a complication, Silas said, and the clinical word was worse than any insult. A piece on the board I did not choose. Your family's offer came at a strategic time. It provided a public reason for my retreat, a reason to appear even more withdrawn. And it brought you here. He said it so coldly, so logically. Leo felt sick. He was a complication. Piece on the board. So you lied to me. Every day. You watched me. The horror of it unfolded in Leo's mind. Every private tear shed in the garden, every frustrated slump at the silent dinner table, every lonely hour in his studio. Had Silas been watching from some hidden monitor? Had he been amused? I observed you, Silas conceded, and his eyes did flicker with something then, not amusement but a deep, unnerving intensity. I needed to know what you were. Were you a spy sent by my enemies? Were you another vulture like Vane? Or were you simply what you appeared to be? And what do I appear to be? Leo cried, tears of fury finally spilling over. A fool. No, the word was sharp, immediate. Silas took another step closer and Leo felt pinned by that seeing gaze. You appeared to be kind. And unbearably lonely. You appeared to have a heart that my enemies do not possess. You painted your sadness on canvases instead of plotting in shadows. You were genuine. In a world of lies, you were the only real thing in this house. The words should have been a comfort. They were a confession. They were also another layer of betrayal. Silas had seen his pain, his authentic self, and had chosen to maintain the lie. He had let Leo suffer in solitude for the sake of his strategy. You saw I was lonely, Leo said, his voice breaking. You saw I was hurting and you did nothing. You could have just talked to me. As a real person. For the first time, a crack appeared in Silas's icy composure. A muscle ticked in his jaw. I made a vow to myself, he said, and his voice lost some of its steel, gaining a rough, unexpected edge. When I saw you, when I realized what they had sent me, not a weapon but a wounded songbird, I vowed I would never touch you. I would never influence you, never pressure you until the day the lies were gone. Until you could see me. The real me. Not the blind ghost, not the target, but the man. And you could choose with clear eyes whether to fly away or stay. The revelation was so immense, so backwards and tragic, it stole Leo's breath. This powerful, seeing man had imposed a sentence of loneliness on both of them as some kind of twisted test of honor. The title of their farce of a marriage, the unspoken rule of their house, I will never touch you, had been Silas's own promise all along. Leo looked at Kai, who was staring at the floor, his fists clenched. And you? Leo's voice was raw. You knew. The whole time. You were my friend from the park and you lied to me every day too. Kai's head snapped up, his gray eyes filled with a storm of agony. My job was to protect, he ground out, the words clearly painful. Both of you. Telling you would have broken his cover. It would have put you in more danger. I hated it. Every second. The raw honesty in his voice was the only thing that kept Leo from screaming at him too. Leo looked from one alpha to the other. The kind, blind husband was a fierce, calculating strategist. The silent, loyal bodyguard was a childhood friend forced to break his promise. Nothing was real. The ground was gone. The rage was still there, a fire in his veins, but now it was mixed with a grief so profound it made his bones ache. He bent down, not breaking eye contact with Silas, and picked up the pathetic, wrapped parcel from his grandfather. It felt like a symbol of every lie he'd ever been sold. I see you now, Silas, Leo said, his voice cold and flat, all tears gone. I see the man who built a cage of lies and called it protection. He turned and walked up the grand staircase, each step echoing in the terrible silence. He didn't look back. He couldn't. The two alphas watched him go, one with the pained intensity of a strategist who had just lost his most important piece, and the other with the despair of a guardian who had failed to protect a heart he was never supposed to care for. The truth was out, and it had shattered everything in its path, leaving only sharp, dangerous pieces behind. Leo's studio door didn't slam. It shut with a soft, definitive click that was somehow louder than any crash. He stood in the center of the room, surrounded by the ghosts of his painted emotions, the joyful forests now buried under angry storms of color. The parcel from Rex was still clutched in his hand. He looked at it, this last link to a past that had also been a lie, and threw it across the room. It hit the wall and fell, unopened, into a shadowy corner. The numbness that had carried him up the stairs began to crack, and what surged through was a pure, white-hot fury. He swept his arm across his main work table, sending jars of murky brush water, tubes of paint, and palette knives clattering to the floor in a cacophony of betrayal. His breath came in ragged, painful gasps. He had been a puppet. A prop. A complication. He stalked to a large canvas, the one he'd been working on just this morning. A vague, hopeful attempt at a sunrise over the manor's gardens. He seized a tube of black paint and squeezed it directly onto the surface, smearing it with his bare hands, obliterating the light. A vow? He spat to the empty room, his voice trembling with fury. He made a vow to let me be lonely? To watch me hurt. The memory of Silas's clear, seeing eyes, so full of intensity and a truth he'd withheld, was a brand on his mind. All those times Silas had politely asked after him through a servant, it wasn't kindness. It was data collection. And Kai, the boy from the park, his one faint star in this dark place. Another liar. A silent guardian who had watched him flounder. I hated it, Kai had said, but he'd done it anyway. Leo's legs gave out. He slid down the wall, sitting amidst the spilled paints, his head in his black-smeared hands. The anger was exhausting, and beneath it the old, familiar loneliness rushed back in, multiplied by 1,000. It was worse now. Before he'd been lonely in a quiet, empty house. Now he was lonely in a house full of actors, and he was the only audience member who hadn't known the play was fake. He didn't know how long he sat there. The twilight through the high windows deepened into full night. No one came. No soft knock from Kai with a dinner tray. No message from Silas. The silence was no longer just empty, it was guilty. It was the silence of a battlefield after the truth had detonated. Finally, a sliver of moonlight painted a path across the floor. A different kind of strength, cold and clear, seeped into Leo's bones. He stood up. He walked to the sink in the corner and scrubbed the black paint from his hands, the water turning dark. He didn't look at his ruined canvases. He needed answers. Not the strategic, logical explanations Silas had given. He needed the human ones. And there was only one person who might, give them to him. He found Kai not at his post by the main door or in the security office, but in the walled garden, standing under the same cherry tree where they'd spoken of the past. He was staring up at the moon, his profile sharp and troubled in the silver light. You knew me when I was real, Leo said, not bothering with a greeting. His voice was scraped raw but steady. Kai jerked, turning quickly. He'd been so lost in thought he hadn't heard Leo approach. Seeing Leo's face, clean of paint but marked with grief, his own stern expression crumpled. Leo. Why are you here, Kai? Leo interrupted, stepping closer. Not as a bodyguard. As you. The boy from the park. Why did you come back into my life just to lie to me? Kai looked down, his fists clenching. After my family moved, it was bad. Silas found me. I was in a bad place. He gave me a purpose. A way to use my strength for something that wasn't destruction. He met Leo's eyes, his own full of a painful honesty. When he showed me the photo of the Omega his board was pushing him to marry for stability, it was you. My heart stopped. I took the job to protect you. I thought if I could just be near you, make sure you were safe in this mess, it would be enough. I never meant to hurt you. That was the one thing I was supposed to prevent. By pretending you didn't know me? By letting me feel completely alone. His cover was your armor. Kai's voice rose, strained with emotion. If anyone suspected he could see, the attacks wouldn't be just business. They'd be physical. You would have been the first target. My silence was the only weapon I had to keep you safe. He took a ragged breath. Do you think I enjoyed it? Watching you walk through these halls like a ghost? Remembering the happy boy in the park with a sketchbook? It was a torture I chose every day. Leo's anger towards Kai wavered. The man's pain was too vivid, too real to be a performance. This was the truth behind the lie. A terrible, impossible choice. And him? Leo asked quietly. His vow? Kai sighed, a heavy sound. He's not what you think. The cold CEO, the strategist, that's real. But the man who watched you paint for hours on the security feed, who had me order every color you ever mentioned, who nearly broke his own rule a dozen times when you cried, Kai shook his head. He's a man who has only known betrayal since he was a boy. His way of protecting you was to build a wall and watch from the top of it. It was the wrong way. A stupid, prideful alpha way. But in his twisted logic, it was a promise of respect. He would not claim what was given to him as part of a deal. He wanted you to choose the real him. Leo wrapped his arms around himself, the night air chilling the tear tracks on his face. The puzzle pieces were settling into a dreadful, coherent picture. Two alphas, each trapped in their own vow of protection, had orchestrated a prison of silence around him. He sees me now, Leo said almost to himself. The real me. And I see him. A liar. He is, Kai agreed, his voice low. But he's also the man who just exiled your ex-boyfriend without a second thought because he insulted you. He's the man who has been fighting a war in the shadows to make his world safe. His methods are flawed. His heart, however, is not entirely blind. Leo looked at Kai, this loyal, conflicted man caught between two people he cared for. What do I do now, Kai? For the first time that night, Kai's expression softened just a fraction. What you want, Leo. Not what the boy in the park would do. Not what the lonely Omega should do. For the first time you have all the secrets. You get to choose what happens next. He gave Leo one last, long look, full of a lifetime of unspoken words, then turned and walked back toward the house, leaving Leo alone under the moon. Leo looked up at the dark windows of Silas's study. A light was on. The strategist was in his tower, surveying the damage. The blind ghost was gone forever. In his place was a man who could see, who had lied, and who, according to Kai, had a heart that wasn't entirely blind. The fury wasn't gone. The hurt was a deep, fresh wound. But the crushing loneliness had shifted. It was no longer a void. It was a crossroads. He was no longer a piece on their board. He was a player. And as the cold moonlight bathed him, Leo realized the most terrifying thing of all. The next move was his. The world did not magically right itself with the dawn. Leo woke in his own bedroom, the one he'd always slept in alone, and for a disoriented moment, he thought the shattering truth of the night before had been a terrible dream. Then he saw the faint, stubborn smudge of black paint under his thumbnail, and the memory crashed back in with the weight of a fallen tree. Silas could see. Kai had known. He was surrounded by liars. A new routine began that day, one made of ice and brittle politeness. Leo left his room and descended the grand staircase. Silas was already in the breakfast nook, a newspaper open before him. He looked up as Leo entered. Not with the gentle listening tilt of his head, but with a direct, unnerving focus. His winter-blue eyes tracked Leo's every move. "Good morning, Leo," Silas said. His voice was calm, but it no longer held the soft, gentle tone Leo associated with him. It was the voice from the foyer, the CEO's voice. Leo didn't answer. He walked to the sideboard, poured himself a glass of orange juice, and took a seat at the farthest possible end of the small table. The silence was thick enough to chew. "Kai informs me you were in the garden late last night," Silas said, turning a page of his paper. It wasn't a question. It was a statement, a reminder that his observation had not ended. "Is that a problem?" Leo asked, his voice flat. He didn't look up from his glass. "No," Silas paused. "The night air can be cold. I would prefer you not become ill." It was the closest thing to concern he'd offered, but it rang hollow. It felt like a check on an asset's condition. "I'll keep that in mind," Leo replied, the words dripping with frost. This was how it went. They shared spaces now, but a canyon lay between them. Leo painted in his studio with the door locked. He took his meals in silence if Silas was present, or in his room if he could manage it. He avoided Kai, whose pained looks were a different kind of agony. The house was no longer a quiet prison. It was an active war zone of unspoken words and wounded pride. The fury in Leo's heart didn't fade. It hardened, turning into a cold, sharp stone. He felt it every time he saw Silas, every time he remembered the years of lonely charade. He was waiting for an apology that wasn't coming. Silas seemed to be waiting for something else. For Leo to understand, to fall in line with the new reality. A week after the revelation, Leo was in the library, searching for a book on art history to escape his own mind. He heard the confident click of dress shoes on the parquet floor. He didn't need to look up to know it was Silas. "We need to talk," Silas said, stopping a few feet away. He wasn't asking. Leo slowly closed the book in his hands. "About what? The weather? The stock market? Or perhaps another lie you've been cultivating?" Silas ignored the jab. "The situation with Rex Vane is not concluded. He is a spiteful man. He has begun making moves against my company. Petty public moves. Spreading rumors." A flicker of cold fear touched Leo's spine, but he smothered it with anger. "And that's my fault, I suppose? For being naive enough to walk into his cafe?" "No," Silas said, and the word was so swift and firm it surprised Leo. "It is my fault. For creating an environment where you felt a vulture's offer was preferable to your reality here." He said it like a clinical admission of error, not an apology. "However, his new target appears to be you." Leo finally looked at him. "Me? How?" "The rumors," Silas said, his gaze steady and intense. "He is not attacking my business acumen. He is whispering in certain circles about my inability to care for what is mine. He is painting you as neglected, seeking comfort elsewhere. He is using your perceived unhappiness, the very unhappiness I caused, as a weapon." The clever, cruel irony of it took Leo's breath away. Rex was using the truth of Leo's loneliness, a loneliness Silas had engineered, to attack them both. The stone of anger in his chest grew heavier. "So what's the new strategy, Silas?" Leo asked, his voice dripping with bitterness. "Another performance? Should I start pretending to be a happy, doting Omega in public? Will that protect your company's reputation?" For the first time, a flash of true frustration crossed Silas's face. "This is not about reputation. This is about your safety. A smear campaign like this makes you vulnerable. It invites others to see you as an opportunity, a weak point to exploit. I will not allow that. You don't get to allow things for me." Leo shot back, slamming the book down on a table. The sound was loud in the quiet library. "You lost that right when you decided to play blind for years. You don't get to swing from cold, calculating liar to protective alpha now that it's convenient." The words hung in the air, sharp and true. Silas's jaw tightened. The CEO mask slipped, and Leo saw something raw and turbulent beneath it. Not just strategy but a powerful, roiling emotion he couldn't name. "You are right," Silas said, the admission sounding as if it were torn from him. "I have no right. I forfeited it. But my desire to protect you is not a strategy. It is a fact." He took a step closer, and Leo stood his ground, though his heart hammered against his ribs. "I made a vow never to touch you, Leo. I have broken every other rule, told every other lie. That is the one promise I kept. And it is the one that now causes you the most pain." His eyes searched Leo's face, and for a second he looked almost lost. "Tell me, what would you have me do?" It was the first time Silas had ever asked him a real question. Not "what do you need?" through a servant, but "what would you have me do?" The power of it was staggering. Leo's anger wavered, mixing with a confusing storm of other feelings, grief, a terrifying hint of hope, and overwhelming exhaustion. The fight drained out of him, leaving him trembling. "I don't know," he whispered, the confession leaving him defenseless. "I don't know what to do with any of this. I just know that I'm tired of being a piece in someone else's game. First Rex's, then my family's, then yours." The raw honesty seemed to affect Silas more than any shouted insult had. The intensity in his eyes softened into something that looked painfully like regret. "Then we are at an impasse," he said quietly. "Because my every instinct is to move you to a safer location, to dispatch Kai to handle Rex permanently, to control the board. But that would make me the game master once more." He turned and walked to the window, looking out at his grounds, his back to Leo. "The next move cannot be mine, Leo. I have made too many already. But know this. Whatever you choose, whether you walk out that door today or stay, Kai and I will ensure Rex Vane can never harm you again. That is not a strategy. It is a promise." He left then, leaving Leo alone in the library with the echo of his words. It wasn't an apology. It was something stranger, a surrender. A powerful alpha had just laid down his arms and conceded that the next move belonged to the Omega he had wronged. Leo sank into a leather armchair, the fight gone, replaced by a deep, trembling confusion. The path wasn't clear. The hurt was still there. But the cage for the first time felt like it had an open door. And the two men who had built it were now standing outside, waiting to see if he would fly away. Or if he would, against all odds, choose to let them try to build something real. The stone of anger was still in his heart, but a tiny, fragile crack had appeared in its surface. The tense quiet that followed Silas's surrender in the library lasted 2 days. Leo felt unmoored, drifting through the mansion that was now too full of meaning. Every room held a memory of the lie. Every glance from Silas was a question he couldn't answer. Every silent presence from Kai was a reminder of a fractured friendship. Then the outside world attacked. It started subtly. Martha brought Leo his tablet with a worried frown. "There's a nasty bit of gossip on the society feed, Mr. Leo," she muttered before bustling away. Leo opened it. There, on a popular gossip site, was a blurry photo. It was taken from inside the cafe on Elm Street. It showed him sitting across from Rex, the small parcel between them. The angle made it look intimate, private. The headline read, "Lonely Thornwood Omega seeks solace with old flame?" His stomach twisted. Rex's first move. A petty, public humiliation. Silas said nothing about it. But that evening, Kai appeared at the door of Leo's studio without a tray of food. His expression was grim. "He's escalated," Kai said without preamble. "The rumors are moving from gossip to business channels. Whispers about instability in the Thornwood household, affecting executive judgment. Silas is on a conference call now, containing the damage." Leo felt a chill that had nothing to do with the room's temperature. Because of a silly photo? "It's not about the photo," Kai said, stepping inside and closing the door. It's about perception. Rex is painting Silas as weak, unable to keep his own omega content and loyal. In the world of alphas like them, that's seen as a critical flaw. It makes Silas look vulnerable to other predators. And it makes you, Kai's jaw tightened. It makes you look like a target for anyone who wants to get at him. The full, ugly picture came into focus. Rex wasn't just trying to embarrass them, he was trying to weaken Silas's entire position, using Leo as the crowbar. And he was doing it by exploiting the very real loneliness Silas had created. The irony was a bitter pill. Later, in the formal living room they never used, Leo heard the tail end of Silas's raised voice for the first time ever. He was speaking on the phone, his tone like shattering glass. If that publication runs the follow-up story, you can consider our entire advertising portfolio withdrawn. Am I understood? Leo paused outside the door. This was the real Silas. Not the gentle ghost, not the apologetic strategist, but the alpha CEO defending his territory. It should have scared him. Part of him felt a thrill. The next morning the second blow fell. Martha was nearly in tears. "Oh, Mr. Leo, it's just dreadful." She showed him her phone. A new article in a slightly more reputable financial blog. The headline was colder. Thornwood's mate linked to rival CEO, personal turmoil at the top. The article was full of sly suggestions, quoting anonymous sources about Leo's visible melancholy at public events last year. Rex was clever. He was using truths and twisting them into poisonous lies. Silas summoned Leo to his study. The room was different now, no longer the secluded cave of a blind man, but the command center of a general. Screens flickered with financial data. Silas stood before a large window, his back to the door. "He's hired a PR firm," Silas said, not turning around. "He's spending significant money to keep this story alive. His aim is to trigger a shareholder concern by the quarterly meeting next month." Leo's mouth was dry. "What can I do?" Finally, Silas turned. He looked tired, but his eyes were blazing with a fierce, protective light that stole Leo's breath. "You can do nothing. That is what he wants. He wants you to hide or to react emotionally. Either would feed the story. So we just take it?" "No," Silas said, a sharp, dangerous smile touching his lips. It was the first real smile Leo had ever seen from him, and it was terrifying in its confidence. "We do not. I act. But I need you to trust me. And I need Kai." For the first time since the truth came out, Leo saw the two alphas not as separate liars, but as a unit. A terrifyingly effective unit. Silas the mind, Kai the will. And both were now fully unleashed with Leo as the cause. "What are you going to do?" Leo asked. "Rex Vane's company, Vane Futures, is built on sand. He's overleveraged, chasing bad deals to look bigger than he is." Silas walked to his desk and tapped a file. "Kai has been gathering the unlisted financials for weeks. Since the day he first showed up here." Leo's eyes widened. Silas had seen Rex as a threat from the very beginning. He'd been planning a counterstrike while still pretending to be blind. Kai's role? Leo's voice was a whisper. "To ensure the information reaches the right people at the right time. Discreetly. And to be my visible hand where I cannot be." Silas met Leo's gaze. "I will dismantle his empire. Kai will ensure he understands the personal cost of touching what is mine." There was no lie in his eyes now. Only a ruthless, unwavering truth. He was doing this not just for business but for Leo. The realization was a shockwave. That afternoon, Leo watched from an upstairs window as Kai, dressed not in his usual bodyguard blacks but in a sharp, dark suit, got into a sleek car and drove away. He was going to war for Silas. For them. The next 48 hours were a silent storm. Leo refreshed the news feeds compulsively. First, a small note about irregularities in Vane Futures filings. Then, a major investor publicly pulling out. Then a cascade. By the second evening, the headline was different. Vane Futures in freefall as financial scrutiny mounts. The gossip about Leo vanished, replaced by the spectacle of Rex's professional implosion. Rex, in his desperation, made his final, foolish move. He showed up at the Thornwood gates demanding to see Leo, his car blocking the entrance. Leo watched on the security monitor as Silas, without a word, went out to meet him himself. Kai materialized at Silas's side, a step behind. The audio crackled to life. Rex was shouting, red-faced. "You think you've won? You ruined me." Silas's voice was calm, clear, and carried the weight of a judge's gavel. "You ruined yourself. You mistook mercy for weakness. You targeted my heart to get to my fortune. A fatal error. Your heart. Rex spat a laugh. You don't have one. He's just another possession to you. Silas didn't flinch. Then you understand nothing. No. If you so much as look in the direction of this house again, the financial ruin you are experiencing will be the least of your concerns. He glanced at Kai, giving a single, almost imperceptible nod. Kai took one step forward. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. The promise of physical consequence was in every line of his powerful frame, in the cold fire of his gray eyes. Rex, seeing the complete and utter defeat before him, stumbled back to his car and fled. Leo turned off the monitor, his heart pounding. The enemy was defeated. Not by a blind ghost, but by a seeing alpha and his loyal protector, working in perfect, brutal sync. They had protected him. They had avenged the slight. But as he stood in the suddenly quiet house, Leo realized the victory felt hollow. It had been theirs. Silas's plan. Kai's execution. He had been the prize to be defended, the reason for the war, but not a participant in it. The cage had held firm against the storm, but he was still inside it. The two alphas had proven they could destroy a world for him. The question that now remained, hanging heavier than ever, was whether they could ever build a new one with him. The defeat of Rex Vane left a strange silence in its wake. The storm of gossip had passed, the business news had moved on, and the gates of Thornwood Manor were quiet. But inside, the air was still thick with everything left unsaid. Victory, Leo was learning, didn't heal wounds, it just gave you a quiet room in which to feel them. He found himself in the conservatory, a glass-walled room filled with lush, green plants and the gentle trickle of a small fountain. It was a living, breathing space, so unlike the still-life perfection of the rest of the house. He was trying to sketch a rare orchid, but his lines were shaky, unfocused. The door opened. It wasn't the soft sound of Kai's entrance or the measured tread of Silas. Both men walked in together. Silas, in a simple dark sweater that made his seeing eyes seem even more vivid, and Kai, back in his casual bodyguard attire, his face solemn. They stopped a few feet away, a united front, but their expressions were not of triumph. They looked like men awaiting a verdict. Leo put his sketchbook down. The stone of anger in his chest was still there, but it had been worn smooth by exhaustion and the confusing realization of their fierce, flawed protection. Is there another enemy to manage? He asked, his voice tired. No, Silas said. His hands were clasped behind his back, a formal posture, but his shoulders were tense. The enemy is gone. The only thing left to manage is us. Kai shifted his weight, his gaze dropping to the floor for a moment before meeting Leo's eyes. We can't go back to how it was, he said, his low voice rough with feeling. The silence. The watching. It's over. Leo looked from one to the other. The brilliant strategist and the steadfast guardian. They had fought a war for him, but now they seemed lost in the peace. So what now? He asked, the question he'd been carrying for weeks. You've done your job. The asset is secure. Silas flinched, the word asset hitting its mark. You are not an asset, he said, the words coming out strained. You never were. That was the first and greatest lie I told myself to justify the smaller ones. He took a careful step forward. I told you I observed you to see if you were a threat. That was only half true. I watched you, because I was captivated. By your kindness in a house that had known none. By the way you turned pain into beauty on your canvases. I told myself it was a strategy. It was a cowardice. I was afraid of what it meant to want something, someone, so real when my entire world was a fabrication. The admission hung in the humid air. Leo's breath caught. This wasn't the cold CO. This was a man confessing a weakness. And you, Leo said, turning to Kai, his voice softer. You said your silence was to protect me. It was, Kai insisted, his fists clenching. But it was also because I was scared. Scared that if I told you who I was, if I broke the cover, I'd lose any right to be near you at all. I thought being a silent shadow was better than being nothing. He looked at Leo, his gray eyes full of a lifetime of regret. I broke my promise to you from the park. I left without saying goodbye once, and I did it again every single day I stood in your hallway and didn't speak. I'm so sorry, Leo. Not as a bodyguard. As Kai. The raw honesty of it undid something tight in Leo's chest. The tears he'd been holding back since the foyer, the tears of rage and betrayal and confusion, finally welled up. He didn't try to stop them. They were quiet tears, slipping down his cheeks as he listened to the two most powerful men he knew lay down their weapons and show him their scars. You hurt me, Leo whispered, the words trembling. Both of you. You made me so lonely I could barely breathe. You made me feel like a fool in my own home. I know, Silas said, his own voice thick. And I would spend every penny I have, tear down every building I own if I could go back and undo it. I can't. All I can offer you is the truth from this moment forward. No more masked. No more watching from the shadows. Kai nodded. What he said. My strength is yours, Leo. Not to guard you in a cage, but to support you. Whatever you choose. Leo wiped his cheeks looking at them. The liar and the silent friend. But they were also the man who had dismantled an empire for him, and the man who had remembered a lonely boy in a park for over a decade. The hurt was real. But so was the love in their eyes. It was a messy, complicated, painful tangle. I don't know if I can just forget, Leo said honestly. We don't ask you to forget, Silas replied swiftly. We only ask for a chance to build new memories. Better ones. Not as a CEO and his obligation or a bodyguard and his charge. But as Silas and Kai and Leo. What does that even look like? Leo asked, a fragile hint of curiosity piercing the grief. A look passed between the two alphas, a silent conversation born of long understanding. It looks like whatever you want it to, Kai said. If you want to leave, we will help you and we will still be here making sure you're safe. If you want to stay, he took a deep breath. It looks like breakfast where we actually talk. It looks like walks in the garden with all three of us. It looks like you teaching me how to paint a straight line, and Silas finally getting to see your art with his own eyes. Silas's lips quirked in a faint, genuine smile. It looks like me asking your opinion on things that matter. It looks like a family. A strange, imperfect one, built on terrible beginnings but a family nonetheless. The word family echoed in the conservatory. It was a word Leo had given up on. A family had sold him. A family had betrayed him. But these two broken, honest men before him were offering to build a new kind of family, one based on choice, not blood or business. The stone of anger in Leo's chest didn't vanish. But it finally truly cracked open. And what flooded out wasn't just more hurt. It was the first tentative trickle of something else. Something that felt like the beginning of forgiveness. Something that felt like hope. He looked at Silas, seeing the powerful, vulnerable man laid bare. He looked at Kai, seeing the loyal friend who had finally found his voice. They were flawed. They had caused him immense pain. But they were here, not commanding, not manipulating, but asking. Offering. Leo took a shaky breath. The next move was still his. But for the first time he didn't feel like making it alone. Okay, he said, the word small but seismic in the quiet room. Okay, let's try breakfast. Where we actually talk. The relief that washed over both alphas was visible. Silas's shoulders sagged as if a great weight had lifted. Kai's stern face softened into an expression of such profound tenderness it made Leo's heart ache. It wasn't a magic fix. The hurt was a deep river they would have to bridge stone by stone. But as Silas offered a tentative open hand, not to lead, but to accompany, and as Kai stepped closer, a steady, reassuring presence at his side, Leo felt the crushing loneliness finally begin to recede. In its place was a terrifying, thrilling, fragile new thing. The possibility of a shared tomorrow. The first breakfast was awkward. The silence wasn't the heavy, lonely kind from before, but a fragile, new thing full of glances and half-started sentences. Leo sat at the head of the small table in the sunny nook, a place he'd always sat alone. Silas sat to his right, Kai to his left. Martha nearly dropped the teapot when she saw the three of them together. Silas cleared his throat. The orchid in the conservatory is thriving, he said, reaching for his coffee. It was a safe, simple observation. The kind any person with eyes might make. It is, Leo replied, stirring his own tea. It's finally getting the right amount of light. He paused, then added, you can really see the purple veins in the petals now. It was a subtle nod, an acknowledgement of Silas's new, truthful reality. A faint smile touched Silas's lips and he gave a small, grateful nod. Kai, who had been staring intently at his plate of eggs as if it were a complex security schematic, spoke up. You used to draw flowers in the park. Dandelions. You'd make them look like lions. Leo blinked, surprised by the memory. A real smile, the first one that felt light in months, broke across his face. I'd give them fuzzy manies. You remember that? I remember, Kai said, his own stern expression softening. It was a tiny moment. A shared memory that belonged only to the two of them, shared now with Silas. It was a brick, laid carefully on the new foundation they were trying to build. The days that followed were a series of small, deliberate choices. Leo didn't lock his studio door. One afternoon he found Silas standing just inside, studying a painting, the ruined one with the black-smeared sunrise. This is how you felt, Silas stated, not as a question. Yes, Leo said, coming to stand beside him. He didn't shy away from the truth anymore. It's powerful, Silas murmured. The anger in it. I deserve every slash of that black. He turned to Leo. Will you paint something new for the main hallway? Something you choose. Something that makes you happy to see. It was an offering. A space in his world, ceded to Leo's joy. Leo simply nodded. Kai's protection shifted too. He no longer lingered in shadows. He asked Leo if he wanted to go for a walk. He didn't follow a step behind. He walked beside him. One brisk morning as they circled the garden, Leo's hand brushed against Kai's. Kai froze for a second, then slowly, carefully, let his fingers intertwine with Leo's. His hand was large and calloused, a warrior's hand, but his hold was gentle. It was a silent promise. I am here. With you. Trust was not rebuilt in a day. There were moments when the old hurt flared. Leo would catch Silas watching him with that intense, calculating gaze, and a chill would run down his spine. But now Silas would speak. I was thinking how the light from that window catches your hair. It's like a stroke of copper paint. Forgive me for staring. He was learning to voice his thoughts, not just strategize them. One evening they were in the library, a fire crackling. Leo was reading, Silas was reviewing documents, and Kai was polishing a set of binoculars for birdwatching. A new, peaceful hobby he'd tentatively suggested. The silence was comfortable, warm. Leo looked up from his book, watching the firelight dance on their faces. Silas, no longer a ghost, but a man of flesh and focus and quiet, growing devotion. Kai, no longer a silent shadow, but a steadfast pillar of strength and rediscovered friendship. His heart, which had been so full of hate and ice, felt impossibly full of something else. It was terrifying. It was wonderful. I'm not leaving, Leo said softly into the quiet. Two heads turned toward him. There was no shock, only a deep, waiting stillness. This house, it was my cage, Leo continued, his voice gaining strength. But you two have taken down the bars. You've shown me your true selves, the ugly and the brave. And you've let me be my true self, the hurt and the hopeful. He looked at Silas. You are not the blind ghost. You are the man who sees me finally. He looked at Kai. And you are not the silent guard. You are my friend from the park who came back. He took a deep breath. I choose this. I choose this strange, imperfect family. I choose you. Both of you. The words hung in the air, a sacred vow of his own making. Silas stood first. He crossed the room and knelt before Leo's chair, a gesture of such humility it stole Leo's breath. He took Leo's hand, his clear blue eyes shimmering. I will spend my life, he vowed, his voice rough with emotion, making this choice the best one you have ever made. Kai was beside them then, not kneeling but placing a large, warm hand on Leo's shoulder, his touch a grounding weight. My heart has been yours since we were boys, he said, the words simple and devastatingly true. It always will be. I will stand with you and for you forever. Leo reached up and covered Kai's hand with his own, while his other hand still held Silas's. A triangle of connection, of promise, of a love that had been forged in betrayal, tempered in fire, and was now being healed in the gentle, steadfast light of truth. The story that had begun with a silent vow, I will never touch you, ended not with a touch of possession, but with a joining of hands. It ended not in a lonely studio, but in a warm library, surrounded by the quiet sounds of a shared life. It ended with an Omega who had learned to see past the lies, and two Alphas who had learned that true strength lay not in control, but in surrender to a shared heart. Outside, the moon shone down on Thornwood Manor, no longer a prison but a home. And inside, by the fire, a new family began its first peaceful night together, their future an open canvas, waiting to be painted in colors of their own choosing.